50 years ago, President John Kennedy survived an assassination attempt on the streets of Dallas, Texas. I'm Peter DeBose, and this is Roundtable on the CB2 Radio Network. We now know that powerful forces were unleashed by that near miss on November 22, 1963. They put the Kennedy administration into turmoil and, of course, led to a constitutional crisis. Here today to talk about those long-ago events is our weekly Roundtable panel. First, there's Cynthia Freeman, White House correspondent for the CB2 network. To Cynthia's right, we have presidential historian and Kennedy biographer Brian Hitch. Finally, there's Jonathan Berkowitz, the son of the late investigative journalist Stephen Berkowitz. Brian, let's start with you. 5 decades later, how should we be looking at the Kennedy presidency?
Peter, I think we have to at least start with what the Kennedy presidency accomplished. It did keep us alive during a very tense time during the Cold War. It did introduce the topic of civil rights to the nation in a profound way. And eventually, it did step back from a deeper involvement in Vietnam. So there were a lot of things that the Kennedy administration should get some credit for. But as your introduction makes very clear, things changed that day in Dallas when President Kennedy was shot at but did not die. If he died that day, he might have become a martyr in our country, but that's not what happened. Instead, by surviving, he became a mere mortal, and he went back to a Washington, D.C. that was on fire with these events. And he ended up having to fight for his presidency in a way that no president has ever had to fight for quite in the same way before or since. And as a consequence of that, I think our nation was changed. I know the Kennedy administration was certainly changed, and we should probably look back on it for the reality of the situation, which is we remember it not so much anymore for what it did, but for how it ended.
What about that, Cynthia Freeman? Does the unraveling of the Kennedy administration have any relevance in today's White House?
Oh, it most certainly does. I think the whole relationship between the press corps and the office of the presidency has fundamentally changed forever to a more serious one, a more accountable one. Let me paint you a word picture for a moment. The White House pool, an area of recreation, too much recreation as it came out in these details, is now the press corps. It is the office where we have our briefings, and the presidents are held accountable, and in their second terms, especially accountable as a result of everything that happened with JFK.
Let's bring in Jonathan Berkowitz now. Your father co-wrote the 1965 story about John Kennedy's secret life. What memories do you have of that story and, of course, the aftermath?
Well, of course, I was just a kid at that time. We had, my mom and I had recently moved there to Washington to be with my dad. And, you know, we were very excited for him because he was covering the president, and it was a great story for him. And then this scandal happened, and all of a sudden everything kind of turned upside down. I didn't really have a great understanding of what was going on, but I knew there was a lot of pressure and stress, and my father actually took me aside and told me that some kids might say some nasty things at school. Actually, that didn't happen. I don't think any of the kids were really aware of what was going on or that I was any part of it, because I really wasn't. But we had to be on our toes about it. And, you know, as I got older, I look back on it, and, you know, people have mixed feelings about my father's work during that time, but I'm very proud of what he did. I think it was a story that had to be told, and he did it with integrity and great journalistic skill.
Brian Hitch, set the table for us here. Now, aside from surviving the shooting in Dallas, what was the most dramatic moment in what remained of the Kennedy presidency?
Peter, there were so many dramatic moments. It was truly an unprecedented time, and it almost depends on who you talk to. A lot of historians do tend to focus on what happened with those audio tapes. As you recall, those were the tapes that were made in the Oval Office by President Kennedy and his advisors, often including Attorney General Robert Kennedy. And so when those tapes were destroyed and prevented from being entered into evidence by legitimate congressional authority, that was a big scandal and a big dramatic moment. And when Dave Powers came forward and admitted that he had destroyed them, and he was a presidential aide, that was heavy drama. And a lot of other people focus also on the firing of J. Edgar Hoover. Hoover and Kennedy never got along, but Hoover always had those files on the president, and that was what he used to basically cause the Kennedys to do things the way he wanted them done. But at a certain point, the relationship was broken, and Hoover was literally fired by the president in the Oval Office, which had to be very dramatic. And of course, because of that firing, Hoover went on and made sure that the Kennedy file was leaked, which ultimately led to the unraveling of the Kennedy administration in the second term. So those really are high points for a lot of people, but I have one of my own that I think is the one that strikes me most because it's so very personal. Imagine the night of November 22nd. John Kennedy has been fired upon in broad daylight on a public street in Dallas in front of a crowd, and he has survived thanks to the brave efforts of Secret Service agent Clint Hill. When he returns to the White House that night, he is still wearing the same suit, the same blood-soaked suit with the blood of Clint Hill on him, and he doesn't even change clothes. He goes into the Oval Office where his brother is waiting to meet him, and the two begin to discuss who might have been behind the Dallas shooting. And the Attorney General of the United States scrawls on a notepad, "We can't talk here." And the President and the Attorney General excuse themselves from the Oval Office and go to a more secure place where they would not be recorded. And you have to ask yourself, in terms of drama, what was it that the President of the United States and the Attorney General of the United States had to talk about that was so secret that it couldn't be talked about in the Oval Office of the United States? And the answer to that question, of course, is what changed history and ended a presidency.
Jonathan, what about you? What were your recollections of the most dramatic moments in the Kennedy presidency?
Well, for my family, it was clearly when this investigation was about to come out. My father was working extremely hard at that time and under a lot of pressure, and the magazine wasn't even sure that they wanted to publish the work that my father did with his partner, Frank Altman. And, they had to go through lawyers and make a final decision. And before they did, they wanted to get the Kennedy administration on record because the president and no one in his administration really had commented very substantively on my father's findings. So they took the unusual step, unprecedented really, of inviting them to the magazine office to review the story right there in the office before it was published. And the president didn't come, but Robert Kennedy came with a team of his advisors, and they gave them an office on the floor there, and not in the newsroom, but in an office there, a private office where they were able to close the curtains and keep everybody from looking inside. And my father was in there trying to get some clue of what was happening. And when the doors opened and Robert Kennedy came out, he gave my father a look that my father described as chilling him to his bones. And he knew from that point on that everything was going to be different for him as a reporter in Washington.
Cynthia, your thoughts, your most dramatic moments in the Kennedy presidency?
Well, Peter, I want to put the spotlight here on Jacqueline Kennedy and her role. Here we had a beloved First Lady betrayed. So there was a top story scandal breaking. 2 days later, there's a news conference. How is Jacqueline Kennedy, the lover of the arts, the fashion trendsetter, going to handle this? How is she going to divorce her husband? This is something everybody wanted to know. How is someone with such an elegance going to handle some very dirty business? And what she did became a role model for future political wives because she held up her head, she stood by her man, and largely ignored the betrayal and went on with her life. She did not divorce JFK, and later we found out that basically she had cut a deal. Joe Kennedy had reached out to Ethel and said, "We will set up trust funds for your two children, but they will only stay active if you do not divorce my son." And she respected that. She was a wonderful mother, and the rest is history.
I want to thank our guests today, Cynthia Freeman, Jonathan Berkowitz, and Brian Hitch. And a reminder, the CB2 TV network will air a 2-hour documentary special on the events of Dallas, Texas, and the subsequent constitutional crisis on Friday, November 22nd at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm Peter DeBose for Roundtable, a presentation of the CB2 Radio Network.